Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. Our program will begin now.
If 2024 was the year of political earthquakes, then 2025 is already the year of the aftershock, as new leaders seek to disrupt the status quo. Will America embrace tariffs and risk a more fragmented, inflationary global economy? Could European debt balloon as NATO countries spend more on defense? Will China double down on export-led solutions to its economic troubles? And could new technologies force a radical rethink of regulation and the future of innovation? Governments will initiate major policy changes, but the unintended consequences and the reaction from business leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and citizens everywhere are the biggest unknowns. This is Bloomberg's The Year Ahead at Davos.
Please welcome to the stage John Micklethwaite, Editor-in-Chief of Bloomberg.
Thank you very much. And you're all welcome to the year ahead at Davos. Even by Davos standards, I think traffic is being difficult. So there will be people who come in as we go through, but you're very, very welcome. We're very proud of Bloomberg House and everything we're doing here. Thank you also to those of you who are joining us virtually. As you said, I'm John Micklethwaite. I'm the editor at Bloomberg, and I'm delighted to be back here. I missed it last year, but it's good to be back. And each year, our goal at this lunch is the same, is to try and prepare people for the year ahead. Obviously, that's got slightly more difficult given the unpredictability of some people in the public sphere. But it is still something that we aspire to do. And we're going to talk about many of the issues today. And we have conversations with Jonathan Haidt, who's Professor of Ethical Leadership at New York University and author of The Anxious Generation, one of the great kind of critics of AI and social media. And also with Sergio Ermotti, the CEO of UBS, who will also be joining us. I'd also like to thank very much Mubadala for supporting this lunch. We're very happy that they're doing that again. It's been a very successful relationship. We'll get started in a minute, and a gentle reminder that this session is being streamed live, so if people ask you to move because you're blocking a camera, I apologize for that, but that's one of the risks of trying to crowd so many people in. Thank you very much, and the program will begin, I think, after the first course. Thank you.
please welcome to the stage Waleed Al-Mokarrab Al-Muhairi, Deputy CEO of Mubadala, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Lauren Keel.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's lunch, so please eat. Please continue eating. And Waleed, I'm so excited to have you here with me. Thanks for joining me on stage.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I know this event is called the Year Ahead, and we're going to talk about the year ahead, but I want to start by asking you to tell me about the year that just ended. So how did 2024 perform for Mubadala?
So 2024 was pretty good by all metrics, I think. So stay tuned for the numbers. They'll come out in a couple months. But I think what I can say is the following. So success for us, in addition to how well we perform financially, is about things like, have we identified the right themes to invest in? So have we allocated our capital efficiently? I think that's number one. Number two, do we still have conviction in the areas that we thought we had conviction in? And number three, have we really fulfilled our mission and stayed true to our values? So that's kind of the framework for what success looks like. So how have we done? I think from a conviction and from a thematic perspective, look, we are in the business of doing a couple different things. Number one, creating national champions at home. Okay? And we've been doing that for years, the latest of which is something called MGX, which is our vehicle for investing in artificial intelligence infrastructure. $30 billion committed to it. And again, this just shows our conviction for how an investment like this can have deep impact in our communities and all around the world. And that comes from a long line of national champions that we've created, whether it's EGA in the aluminum space, our space company, Space 42, M42, our medical services company, and there's just a whole raft of champions that we've created at home that have regional and global impact. But that's not enough because we are a global investor at the end of the day. And so for us, as we double down on themes like technology, life sciences, energy transition, infrastructure, I mean, these are really just areas that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And so far, I think we've done a pretty good job at it. So, I look back at 24, we've done more things right than wrong, and I'm happy to say that it's been a pretty good year.
I want to touch on some of those different markets that
Sure.
you mentioned. I don't think anyone could walk this promenade without seeing AI 100,000 times. As you are thinking about where you're investing, is technology, is AI a bigger focus? How does that compare to things like energy and infrastructure that are traditionally bigger parts of your portfolio?
Well, it's about balance, right? So at the end of the day, you just go with where your convictions are. And so there's no question that technology is changing the world. And so we created this vehicle, MGX, and we said, as we thought about what the AI landscape looked like, where could we have the most impact from an investment perspective? And so for us, it's really around AI infrastructure. So data center investments and that type of thing. So it's the nexus of data centers and energy and kind of all the regulation that goes around that from an international perspective. So I think that's number one. But life sciences, incredibly important. So whether it's the provision of healthcare, drug discovery, or contract manufacturing, so not to get technical, but the CDMO space has been very, very good to us. Infrastructure, I think has great tailwinds behind it, and certainly energy transition. These are the 4 or 5 areas that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and that I think will carry us for the next couple of years.
Is AI also changing the way that you all work?
It does.
How?
So a couple different ways. We're inaugurating our AI Investment Committee co-chairman. And so what we're doing is we've actually spent a lot of time feeding our business cases and investment memos into our co-pilot that we spent a year developing. Unclear what its track record is going to be. It's still early days. I still think I have a job for the next 12 months or so.
That's good. We'll see you again next year then.
Yeah, but we have high hopes, and so hopefully it'll help us from a decision-making perspective. But one of the things that I know that a lot of people don't think about is as we find ways to deploy AI to create efficiencies, one of the things that it will do is create time for executives. And so if everything works as planned and it creates time, the real question is going to be, what are you going to do with that time, right? And how do you make sure that it's productively spent? I'm sure some small subset will go spend some time in the Mediterranean, go to Greece, go, and that's great, by the way, so that's good. But at the same time, some of us spend our best time thinking and strategizing when we're able to create a little bit of space for ourselves. So if everything works in the way that we want it to work, then hopefully portfolio construction will get better, and we'll be able to kind of crisply articulate what investment themes are going to look like going forward. And I'm excited about that.
You mentioned energy, and I think we're in a very different place with that conversation as we think about climate and sustainability than we would have been a couple years ago here. I'm curious, how are you thinking about energy transition in your portfolio?
So, it's a big theme for us, but we've been in the energy transition business for, must be about 18 years now. We have a vehicle called Mustab that we created. We used to own all of it. It's now owned by ourselves, ADNOC, and Taha, which is another energy player in Abu Dhabi. Today, we have developed and own more than 30 gigawatts of renewable energy. And that's a relatively big number. And we have line of sight over the next 5 years to get to 100. And this is an international player. We are in Europe, we are in the United States, and we are in developing countries, emerging markets. So this really has been our homegrown champion in that space. And what started out as kind of a solar and a wind player with a little bit of geothermal is now, at the cutting edge of battery deployment, and is really thinking through how we can have not only impact in our communities, but how we can be kind of good citizens from an energy transition perspective.
Another place I know you're growing heavily is in Asia. What markets in particular are you focused on? Why are you looking so heavily at Asia right now?
So, again, it's about balance, right? And it's about, at least in my world, as I think about how we construct our portfolio, it's about risk and reward. And so are you being compensated correctly for your risk? Maybe starting with the United States. For me, the United States is still the best risk reward. And there's a reason why 41% of our portfolio is deployed in the US. But when I think about where we have growth, so the UAE is growing. And remember, we're part of Asia too. So we're projected to grow at a little bit more than 5%. And so that's very exciting for us. And then when I look at where we've historically and will continue to invest in Asia, it's really India as a bright spot. China, we've been in there for more than a decade. Japan, where we're seeing a flurry of activity. Korea, to a slightly lesser extent. And if I were to talk about developing Asia, we're getting a little bit excited, even though it's still very, very early days, about places like Indonesia as well. Right? And so when I think about Asia, India really is a bright spot for us for historical reasons, proximity, cultural reasons, and we have great partnerships there. China, we've been in for more than a decade, and there, we have a list of both direct and indirect investments, so both fund relationships, but also direct positions that we've taken in everything from consumer businesses to real estate, to mall management companies, to what have you. And obviously, they're going through a little bit of a rough patch at the moment, but I'm quite confident that China will come back and will grow again. And I know that the government is spending a lot of time thinking about that. And we want to make sure that we're well positioned to capture when the risk-reward equation flips in their favor.
What markets are you less excited about right now?
Well, it's not about being less excited, but I am telling you, I can tell you that, it's harder to deploy capital in places like Europe. Okay? I'm hearing some chuckles.
Laughter from the audience.
Okay. I think I said that reasonably diplomatically. I think what that means is it's not that we don't invest in Europe, but it's that we're very opportunistic now, number one. Number two, it's harder to find great companies. Not that they don't exist, but it's just harder to find them. And second, we have to navigate, a regulatory kind of web, if you will, network that sometimes makes things a little bit more challenging. So again, we're going to invest in Europe. We will keep investing, but it's harder. And so therefore, from a relative basis, I think we're going to slow down a little bit. Mm-hmm. And again, it's about risk reward, right? So when you compare it to the UAE, the US, and Asia, which I just spoke about, if Europe's a little bit harder, we're going to invest a little bit less.
And what's next in the year ahead for Mubadala?
Oh boy. Well, look, we're growing, and I think we're doing reasonably well. We recycle something like 10 to 12% of our portfolio every year. Just this is public information. You know that we're about $330 billion today, and so we're deploying at a pretty good pace. I don't think that that's going to change. What I can say is that we have our mainstay businesses like our private equity business, which is great and will continue. But we have relatively newer businesses, which are only 7 or 8 years old, like our credit business, which is growing quite quickly, has performed reasonably well, and you know, we have great partnerships in that space. We have partnerships in the United States and Europe and in Asia, and that's one that I think is going to grow reasonably well. And our infrastructure business is, I think, poised for growth as well. So you combine that together with our national champions that we create every couple of years, and you know, the growth rate that Mubadala is exhibiting is pretty good from where I'm sitting.
Awesome. Thank you, Waleed. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We are going to bring out the next course of lunch, and then we will be back with some exciting conversations in just a few minutes. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Waleed.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Jonathan Haidt, author of The Anxious Generation and professor of ethical leadership at New York University, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you all had fun, because I feel like this next conversation will be fun, but actually also a little bit scary. John, thank you so much for joining us. John Haidt, social psychologist, and really the man about town that everyone wants to understand on how to keep their kids off social media and what that means for the workforce that these chief executives have to manage. So, John, I mean, you basically wrote this book that's really everyone's trying to read, The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. Then that translates into life for the people that become, of course, the workforce of the chief executives are tomorrow. I mean, how bad is it?
Right. Well, so first, let me just say, actually, is this loud enough? Okay.
Yeah.
So first, I just sort of understood 10 minutes ago, 8 minutes ago, that this was a live talk in front of all of you. So actually, this is like, wow, and it's pretty cool. I'm very glad to be able to talk to you directly. I thought we were just doing a podcast. And second, how many of you, raise your hand in this room if you have any children under the age of 10. Raise your hand. Okay, you guys are going to love this talk. This is just what you are waiting for. How many of you have kids between 14 and 28? Raise your hand. Okay, you're going to have much more mixed feelings. But all of you have Gen Z kids. If your kids were born after in 1996 or later, then your kids are Gen Z. Very different from the millennials. And when you said just how bad is it, so the way to understand this is if you look at the graphs of teen mental health, we have very good data in the US, and we've collected from many other countries. In the US, at least in the UK, from the late 90s through 2010, 2011, there's no sign of a trend. Pretty stable, whether you're looking at depression, anxiety, self-harm, all those rates, no big change. And then all of a sudden, in 2012, it's as though someone flipped on a light switch in Menlo Park, California, and all of those numbers go shooting up, especially for girls. For girls, it's a very sharp elbow. For boys, it's more gradual. The rates, a quarter of American girls say that they have made a suicide plan. They've actually gotten to the point of, they think about suicide often, and they've actually made a plan. Not that they've made an attempt, but being sad, anxious, and thinking about suicide is a normal part of being an American teen now. It was not like this in 2010. So especially when we look at anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide, we see, I think, the greatest destruction of human capital and human potential in human history. Now, okay, leaving aside the 2 world wars, it's hard to compare, but the fact that this is global. And I wrote the whole book focusing on mental illness, on the mental health problems. And only since the book came out did I realize that the attention devastation, the inability to pay attention, in the long run is probably going to be even a bigger deal and more important for business. So when we look at mental health, when we look at the ability to attend to think about something for 5 minutes, and also the social relationships and the ability to be a reliable employee or spouse, it's going to be rough.
John, because this basically changes the vortex, right? If you start scrolling as a young teen, as a tween, it changes the way your brain is wired.
That's right. Right, because the human brain is at 90% of its full size when you're 6 years old, and everything beyond that is like, some stuff goes away, some stuff tunes up based on practice. Neurons that fire together wire together. And so if you're practicing skills, if you're playing, if you're doing chores, your brain develops in a normal way. But if instead we say, how about instead of attending to the adults around you and the older kids that you're copying, instead of that, how about you just do this all day long, and you are socialized, and your brain, the transition is managed by weirdos on the internet who were selected by other people for their emotional extremity, and then the algorithm fed them to your child. And so this is completely insane what we've done. We've basically blocked human development by putting kids on screens. In America, 50% of our kids say that they are online almost constantly. The phone is always in their hand. If they're waiting for an elevator, the phone comes out. If they're in the bathroom, the phone comes out. The iPhone is now waterproof. Some take it into the shower. If there's a lull in conversation, the phone comes out. It's very difficult for them to deal with anything that's a little bit boring.
So what does what do colleges, what do chief executives, what do recruitment agencies need to do to either communicate differently or train them differently once they come of age?
Yeah. So here what I'd like to do is I can give you advice based on what I saw on university campuses, because it hit us first. In 2015, in 2013 there was no sign of this, or 2012, no sign of it. And by 2015, some of you might remember, because it happened all over the English-speaking world, huge protests over microaggressions. Someone said something and it becomes a whole big issue. Just what we saw on campus is students getting very upset about what seemed to be small things that previous generations would just sort of say, like, oh, he's stupid or whatever. And the way we managed on campus was exactly wrong. You should learn from our mistakes and don't do what we did. What we did was we completely accommodated them. And it's in part because a lot of them was about identity issues, race, LGBTQ, gender. So we don't have the moral, on campus, we're all on the left, everyone's on the left. There are some conservatives, but they're in the closet. So we did not have the moral resources to say, now, wait a second. Is this really true, the thing you're saying? We had to completely validate everything, accommodate to it. We put in biased response lines. There are signs in the bathrooms at my university for how to report me if they think anything I've said is biased. And so encouraging a culture of snitching and reporting is a terrible thing to do. So don't do what we did. Now, what happened is especially once George... When the Coddling the American Mind came out in 2018, a lot of people said, oh, come on, this is just college kids being college kids. They're not going to be able to do this at Goldman Sachs. They're not going to be able to do this at Google. Well, actually, they did, and Progressive industries, especially knowledge work industries, really accommodated. Manufacturing didn't. But think if you're hiring from elite universities, and especially if you're in media, entertainment, advertising, they did accommodate. And so I'm sorry for this long explanation, but to get back to practical lessons, leadership always requires you to define the culture. And what social media has done is it has shredded any common understanding, and it has allowed everyone to make a bid to control the culture. And at universities, we allowed the students to set the culture. And that's why American universities have committed the greatest act of brand destruction in American history. We used to be so respected in 2015. Now our brand is in the toilet because of the stupid things that we did. And so you have to set the culture, which means don't give in, don't accommodate. Now, do listen to them. Every generation brings complaints, and some of them are right. Like, for example, why should bankers work 100 hours a week? Gen Z is saying we don't want to do that, and I think they're probably right. So listen to them, talk to them, but don't be very wary of accommodating, and you have to define the culture, and the key word you need is anti-fragility. So anti-fragility refers to the fact that humans are not actually fragile, that especially young people, we need setbacks and challenges and problems, and then we grow by overcoming them. And so, if you say, I want you to succeed in this job, I want you to grow. So I'll give you a choice. I can either give you feedback the way many do, where we're afraid of hurting your feelings and we're afraid you'll freak out, and I'll be very gentle, but I don't think that's really what you want. The other way we can do this is I'm going to give you tough feedback. I'm going to tell you everything that I think you did wrong because I want to help you. I want you to succeed. And what I find is I teach undergrads and MBA students at NYU Stern. What I find, I give them that question, which one would you want? 100% every year say, give me the hard feedback. But if you don't preface it, if it's just you just give hard feedback, a lot of them are going to feel very hurt, and many of them will ghost you. They will leave without even saying goodbye. So you have to understand, this is not their fault at all. No blame. Don't make fun of them, as we often do behind the scenes, both in the academy and in business. Understand that we blocked their childhood. We kept them on screens. We didn't let them go out and play and get in arguments and settle those arguments themselves. And this is the result. But especially from their early 20s, there's a lot. They can still grow a lot. Late 20s is a little harder because the brain is kind of locked down by then. But early 20s, there's still a lot of room for growth.
John, the third-party fact-checking, the fact that that's being removed in a lot of platforms, what are the implications of that?
Yeah, so, just approaching it from the outside, you think, oh, well, that's terrible. Now it's just going to be, random. And that was my first reaction. But I spoke to a couple of people who know a lot about Meta and this area. And what one of my friends said is, actually, the fact-checking wasn't working very well because it tends to be, as it always is, it tends to be just progressives saying that's false, but things on our side are true. And of course, that was part of the big complaint during COVID, that the Biden administration was working with the social media companies to suppress right-wing ideas. And it's true. That actually happened. And so the right completely does not trust the left, and the left over and over again does what it can to betray the trust.
But how do you see divisions? I mean, societies are pretty divided. Yeah. Do you see that divide being better?
No, it's going to get worse and worse forever, I think.
Forever? Or is there a point?
I can't say forever. What I can say, so in general, my suspicion is that this year is the calmest, most sane and normal year that we'll ever have, and that'll be true every year going forward. So I began to think this before we were all thinking about AI. I'm a social psychologist, and looking at the conditions for democracy, the founding fathers of the United States knew that democracy always blows up. You don't want the people and their passions to be swayed by demagogues. And so in America, we don't have a democracy. By design, we have a republic with democratic elements. And that was predicated on the idea that information moves slowly. And if something terrible happens in Boston, it's going to take weeks for it to reach Washington, or a week or two. So all of our suppositions about democratic discussion are out the window now that everything's on Twitter and other X and other forms of social media. So I think especially the American form is going to be sorely tested, and I don't know that it's going to hold. I think we might have to have major change and reinvention. I don't know that the American project is going to, the American experiment is going to continue in its present form. There are other forms, other countries I don't know enough about. There may be much more stability elsewhere. But my point is, if you think about a community that is trying imperfectly to get at truth or public opinion, we're not going to get that, again, for a long time. Now, the digital technology, in theory, could give us the best democracies ever. And so there's a real possibility that we go through 10 to 50 years of chaos and disruption as when the printing press came in. And then 50 years from now, we have the most amazing societies ever. That's my hope. But we're not going to get, it's not going to come in 5 or 10 years. It's going to take a lot longer than that is my prediction. Nobody knows. I don't want to be too confident here. But as a social psychologist, I think the conditions for the liberal democracies of the Gutenberg era, based on text, are now not holding.
I did warn everyone. It was going to be a depressing conversation.
But exciting, I hope, right? This is all about the future.
Depressing. John, when you see how close Elon Musk is to President Trump, how Mark Zuckerberg is close to President Trump, what does that mean for regulation?
Oh, my God. I mean, in America, we've always had the problem that, that you can buy influence so cheap. It's so cheap to give money to a campaign. And we have all these problems about money in politics. Those have been there for my whole life. And now suddenly, it's like exponentially worse. And the fact that the president of the United States launched his own cryptocurrency the day, I mean, this is completely insane. This is complete corruption. This should be completely illegal. But so much stuff is going on that, like, we don't even know what to object to. So the fact that the richest and one of the most powerful men in the world is now such a powerful man in terms of policies that will affect his own company. I greatly admire the man. He is a benefactor of humanity for the major things he's doing. But my God, I mean, it's just, democracy or government 101 is, you don't just let the major people who run industries write their own laws with the backing of the executive. I mean, so we're in for a wild ride. That's what I'm telling you. It's going to get a lot weirder.
What's TikTok? Is TikTok a test on what happens to TikTok?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, TikTok is such a national security threat. And it's not just because of the privacy and the data. That's what the court case focused on. I have an essay up on my Substack. Go to afterbabel.com titled, "TikTok is Harming Kids at an Industrial Scale." We just took quotes from company employees, just their own words that came out in legal briefs because they're being sued by a lot of states. Just their own words. They know they are addicting kids. They're exposing them to sexual predation. I mean, it's horrible what this company is doing to American kids, not to Chinese kids. Douyin is much more healthy. But the version they give us is by design, addictive and stupefying. And this is a national security threat. So I cannot believe that Trump is going to reverse this. Oh, wait a second. Policy doesn't matter. Money talks.
Okay, John, we also have actually our very own, thing that we're putting out by Olivia Carville, and this is something that we want to alert you to. It's a documentary called You Can't Look Away, and it talks about the transformative effects of social media on mental health. So what would you do for your own kids, depending on how old they are? No social media until?
Yeah, right, so let me give you the 4 norms. The reason that we're so lost in this is because each of us as individual parents try to do something, and then our kid says the magic phrase. What is it?
Please.
Mom, I'm the only one. I'm the only one who doesn't have a smartphone. The kids are making fun of me. I'm excluded. So we're caught in a collective action trap. We each give in, which makes it harder for everybody else to do the right thing. So the way out is collective action. That's what my book is about. And that's, I think, why the book is doing so well, is I'm not just saying, oh, my God, look at all the problems. I'm saying, actually, once we understand how we got here, we can get out if many or most of us do 4 things. Here it is. No smartphone until high school in the U.S. or 14, let's say. No smartphone before age 14. Let them have a flip phone. You can text with them. You can't be on a flip phone 12 hours a day. But a smartphone, half of your kids will be on a smartphone 14 hours a day. So no smartphone before 14. No social media before 16. What age should kids be when they start talking to sextortionists and child molesters around the world? I think 16 is probably, maybe higher, but at least 16. The 3rd norm is phone-free schools, and this one is happening all over the world really rapidly. Brazil just announced they're going to do it. So if your kids go to a school where the kids can have access to the phones during the day and you can text them, your kid is not getting a good education. Your kid is getting a much worse education because they can't pay attention even to their friends. And then the 4th norm is far more free play, independence, and responsibility in the real world. All of us, almost, let me just ask you, how old were you when you could go out on your bicycle and go see your friends? Just yell it out. Around what age did you get independence? Just yell it out. 5, 6, 7. Yeah. 6 to 8 is 5, 6, 8. That's when we all got it. The world is so much safer now than it was when we were growing up. Many of us grew up in America during a crime wave. So the world's gotten much safer, but we don't trust our neighbors. Again, not in all European countries, but in the Anglo countries, we don't trust our neighbors. We don't trust our kids to go out, and that's part of why they spend their whole lives on screens. We've got to give them back an exciting, fun, in-person childhood. And that's the hardest one, because that's the one we have to give up something. And we have to be a little afraid. And then after a few times, you realize, wait, my kid can ride his bicycle to a friend's house and come back.
John, thank you so much for joining us. John Haidt there, joining us on The Anxious Generation. Now, please all enjoy your lunch, and then our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, will be up shortly for a conversation with the UBS Chief Executive, Sergio Ermotti. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, everyone.
please welcome to the stage Sergio Ermotti, CEO of UBS Group, for a conversation with Bloomberg's John Micklethwaite.
I think you have to go on this. Perfect. Yeah. Sergio, thank you. Welcome to Bloomberg House, which you were just admiring and saying you'd help pay for. We were just talking earlier about how difficult it was to invest in Europe. You look at the year you've had, particularly the time since you took over Credit Suisse. Most people would say that was one of the great bargains of banking. Your share price has risen by more than 80%, now the highest since 2008, and you are now Europe's most valuable bank, so well done on that. But the first thing in terms of the year ahead is a man called Donald Trump has arrived in Washington. And I wondered, you are based in Switzerland. Switzerland is still a pretty open country in terms of trade. What do you worry about what he will do in terms of tariffs and trade?
Yeah, thank you for. Let me just take an exception on your bargain issue. So I think that's, if you add up the true cost of the acquisition, you will see that the 3 billion headlines we paid for, you had to add up at least another 15 to 17 billions for the restructuring, and therefore it will be eventually a good transaction. But it takes time to make it work.
That's always the best sign of a banker, when he denies he's done a brilliant deal.
Thank you for knowing. No, look, Trump, the new administration, first of all, I have to say that, like everything when it starts, there is a lot of promises, a lot of ambitions, a lot of promises they make, and we'll see how much is really going to calm down effectively. I do hope, at the very least, that the new administration can deliver on its agenda on the geopolitical standpoint of view to bring peace or ease tensions, not only in the east part of Europe, but also looking at the Middle East and also normalize relationships with China. Of course, on the other side, the tariff topic, it's something that is quite potentially dilutive to any deregulation or easiness for doing business. So I take a positive but also balanced approach on the new administration.
Is there anything particularly on banking that you're looking for? There's been a lot of talk about deregulation. Everyone's share prices have gone up. But do you think there's one particular thing that you'd like Trump to change in terms of what some people see as the over-regulation of banking in America?
Look, I think that the real, true, honest assessment is that the new administration is unlikely to put new regulation, which for the banking industry is already an achievement, right? So a new regulation, and particularly regulation that goes in conflict with existing regulation. So hopefully we will see some simplification in terms of avoiding overlapping tasks by different agencies in the US. That would be a welcome move. I don't believe, honestly, that we should have a huge amount of deregulation for larger banks. I think that you look back at COVID and any crisis, big banks now are strong, are able to step in and being part of resolving issues rather than being the one that creates issues. So I wouldn't really welcome a huge wave of the regulations. What I can see is that, of course, what happened in the US doesn't mean automatically that you will see in Europe or in Switzerland or in Asia deregulation. So the fact is that US banks may become even more competitive internationally through a more benign environment.
Just come back to that in a second, that idea that others may have to follow. But just one particular thing that's already happened in your industry is you have a variety of banks, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, they've all left the net zero banking alliance. Are you going to do that? There seems to be a general retreat from that sort of thing.
Yeah, look, I think that we have to carefully analyze the situation. We also want to see exactly what GFANZ is going to come up with in response to that. It is fair to say that the last few years, the ambition should remain the same, to help contain climate change and go towards a net zero. The reality is that it's not possible and it's not credible to think that you can do it at the same pace and the same extent in every single country and region in the world. So that one is a major issue. The second one is, which I have to say I always question and challenge, the financial services industry is not the policeman of politicians. Politicians have to take clear, coherent views on the matter and not try to ask banks to act as a policeman. So we are committed to help clients and society to achieve those targets, but we also believe that taking too much of an excessive position on denial or unrealistic short-term ambitions is not the way to help. We believe helping the transition is the most fundamental part of the equation. We need to free up resources to help the transition, and that's the reason why banking is part of the solution.
But you shouldn't be the policeman.
No.
You mentioned earlier just that idea that there might be pressure on European regulators. Many people would hope there would be a change. You are actually quite a good example of somebody who's got a problem in that respect, because you've got the Swiss government now talking about putting even more capital charges on you. I think you already have to do 20 billion to do with Basel and the existing regulation. But you now might get another 25 billion because they're talking about making you apply capital to all your overseas subsidiaries.
Well, look, first of all, I have to say that we do agree with many of the proposals of the Swiss government in respect of taking the lessons learned from the Credit Suisse failures. We believe it's quite clear that Credit Suisse went down because they had a very bad business model. They were mismanaged for too many years. That's the crude reality. And also, they benefited from incredible regulatory concessions over the years. And so we believe that a balanced approach in assessing what needs to be fixed versus what happened, where all stakeholders recognize their negative contribution to what happened, is the right solution. Putting more capital, it will only make us less competitive, less able to help our clients to grow. It's going to make banking services more expensive, and it's not going to definitely help fostering a competitive financial center. So we hope and believe that a proportionate outcome should be the solution.
But do you think you can get away with not having to put 100% capital against these foreign subsidiaries? That is the big...
I don't know. I think that's really still a quite complex discussions. We are working at working level. We are trying to present the case for why it's totally unnecessary and incredible penalizing to say that a foreign participation is worth nothing on your balance sheet. That's an extreme overreaction that will not really help foster Switzerland as a leading financial center.
If you're being punished for being Swiss, there's been talk of you moving your listing from Zurich to New York. Why not take advantage of this much better regulation somewhere else?
So I think that we are not punished for being Swiss. We are punished for being part of the solution. So, which is a quite strange concept.
You would be punished less if you were in America.
No, but look, listing is not the major factor. It's where you are domiciled and who is your leading regulator that matters. So the regulatory framework is the Swiss one. Swissness is helping us. It's a quite differentiating element. The Swiss business is one of the pillars of our strategy. We want to continue to be successful operating out of Switzerland. We will make our case till the last minute in making sure people understand not only the risk we may pose, but also the benefits we create for the country. And when that happens, then politicians should take their decisions about the future. So I don't think for me it's a topic to even consider at this stage to move away from Switzerland.
What about the European Union? You know, all this time we have all been waiting for a banking union, for all these things that Mario Draghi had them in his report. Is Trump the wake-up call finally for Europe to look at having banking across the European Union?
Well, I think Europe seems to look like a bear sleeping during the winter. So I don't know how many wake-up calls they need in order to feel. I mean, today probably with this heat here, the warm weather, maybe some of them are waking up suddenly. But if you look at, my view is that I thought that way when Brexit happened.
Yeah.
I thought Europe, that would be the wake-up call for Europe. Right? Try to, So honestly, one can hope that Europe understands that being more strong and independent, and here I'm thinking about defense, I would say that is a fair comment President Trump is making about Europe putting more money behind defense, but I think that Europe should develop its own defense and not relying so much on the US for its own defense. So, by the way, that's also a good way over the years to develop innovation. So, at the end of the day, I think that hopefully it's a wake-up call, but I'm not so convinced that the current state of Europe will allow that to happen. Too much fragmentation, still too many parochial views on the matter, and
But that's particularly true of banking, isn't it? I looked. You're worth. UBS is worth about 120 billion. As I said, you are the biggest bank on this continent, excluding sort of Britain. By contrast, JP Morgan is worth 730 billion. There's a whole stream of American banks which have got bigger because they've been allowed to merge, they've been allowed to grow. And what happened is when you merged, lots of people, including me, thought, well, finally Europe will start seeing cross-border mergers. And you've had a little bit with Commerzbank and stuff, but you have not had the kind of consolidation that most people would think was healthy for Europe.
Well, look, first of all, I think JP Morgan is a league on its own. If you go back to the next level, you're almost half of the next. And then you go down. So no, our valuation is driven by our business model. We are, if you look at UBS, we have 60% of our revenues are coming from wealth management and asset management. So asset gathering, 20% is Swiss business, 20% is the investment bank. The only peer that is close to us is Morgan Stanley with around 55% and 45% investment bank. The average global banks in the US has 20%, 21%. The average European banks have 11%. So our multiple and valuation premium is driven by our business model, it's not a banking.
But all the same, there's no doubt European banks are very small compared with the American ones in general, and that most people would have thought there would be a wave of deal making. And one thing is, would you be a participant in that? You've done a very successul deal. Why not do another one?
We are still digesting, so it's very difficult for us to think about dinner. So I think that when I look at true consolidation in Europe without banking union is not possible. If you look at everything that goes on right now, is de facto domestic consolidation.
Yes.
I mean, where the main driver of value creation is domestic. So European banks, we have been saying that for a while, won't be able to compete if you don't have a first banking union and a capital market union. Look at the balance sheet of European banks. We are still, and it's not an issue, but we are still basically financing a lot of things that in the US are financed by capital markets. So a lot of the resources banks use are going to different businesses, and not necessarily, in terms of profitability, better performing ones. So for one unit of risk, a US bank has a higher return than, on average, a European banks because of the role we play in the economy and in the system. So fundamentally, but in order to mobilize resources to transform Europe, to go through the transition in terms of climate changes and the investments we need to do, we need to free up resources that are not effectively used. And the capital market union and a banking union is a prerequisite for that.
Can I ask you about America, seeing you said how good it was? You're now the biggest wealth managers outside America. Inside America, you're still trying to grow. There are other bigger ones there. And I wondered whether acquisition was a way to do that. You know, you've complained sometimes about the profitability of what you do in America. Is that the answer, or is it a question of sorting out what you already have there?
I think it's mainly sorting out what we have. We need to do a better job in managing our cost, enhancing our banking capabilities to wealth management clients. We manage $2.2 trillion of clients' assets. So we have scale. Yep. So we can't really argue about scale. But it's fair to say that we don't have all the full banking capabilities that, you know, in deposits, in loans, and that are necessary to develop that business. We can go a little bit deeper in terms of client coverage, maybe more into the high net worth affluent space. But most importantly, we have to recognize that, you know, our banking platform has elements of fixed costs that are not distributed to many businesses like our peers in the US. So we have a scale issue in that dimension, not necessarily a vertical
you have this very
but a horizontal dimension. Now, if you allow me, because it's very important, once we narrow the gap in terms of margins, which I believe we will do, we will never close the gap to our peers. We will have because of our uniqueness as a business model in terms of asset gathering, we will still command a premium valuation compared to many banks. So higher cost-income ratio is not necessarily the only solution. We need to really have efficiency in the way we deploy capital as a way to drive business.
Very technical one, but you do most of your stuff in America through independent fund manager. You have independents who are
financial advisory.
Financial advisors. By contrast, you know, you seem to want to do more stuff in-house. Is that a fair?
No, I think that our financial advisors are best in class. We are very well positioned in the high end in terms of segmentation of clients. The productivity of our financial advisor is very high. What is fair to say that we don't have enough institutionalized coverage of those clients. I'm going back to what I mentioned about lending and deposits and things that are creating a more balanced profitability for the bank, where, you know, right now it's fair to say that transaction and fee-based split between financial advisor and the bank is not the right business mix. So that's where we need to go. And if we do that, we help our financial advisor be even more relevant to their clients.
I'll ask you quickly about Asia. You know, you've been growing a business there. A lot of people are worried about China. Do you see your growth mainly coming outside China?
We are not worried about China. I think that, of course, things have changed in the last 5-6 years. It's a little more volatile, less growth. But, you know, if I look at the momentum we had in 2023, 2024, despite the huge integration we are going through, China and Asia, Greater China and Asia are still a huge driver of growth. So we remain very confident. We manage almost 700 billion of clients' assets, almost 3 times more than the next competitor. We are well positioned for future growth. And, you know, also you look at the demographics there and wealth creation in the region, it's quite clear that one cannot be a big player in wealth management without having a core and big commitments to Asia and China.
I'll ask you a couple of final questions about Credit Suisse and you. But at Credit Suisse, you say you want to fully integrate it by the end of 2026. You cut 10,000 jobs. You still have roughly 110,000 people. Do you think are there more job cuts that will have to come as part of that process, or do you think you've done that?
No, look, you know, we had as a target to save 13 billion of cost. of the pro forma banks end of 2022, we achieved 7.5 billion. The next 5.5 billion are going to come through rationalization of the client of the IT platforms, and also the inevitable redundancy, the painful part of the equation. Having said that, if you look at our natural attrition, it's almost around 6-7% a year. So we have been also insourcing jobs that we were outsourcing before, so limiting the numbers of proactive redundancies. So we still believe that we will be able to manage in a responsible way the inevitable fact that we need to cut costs, because we inherited a business that was losing billions structurally. So it's not about extracting synergies of two going concerns banks. First, we had to restructure Credit Suisse and then look for synergies. And that's the painful part. And, you know, in M&A, the most painful part is always the human part. So far, you know, being the competitive environment, being very active, and demography is helping. It's quite amazing because we have a lot of people going into retirements. So we hope we can mitigate.
So my last question. You previously said you're likely to stay as CEO to the end of 2026. Everything you've said throughout this seems to imply this is a massive job that's ongoing. Is there a chance you would go on further than that?
But look, you know, I really believe that leadership is not only talking about what you think you're going to do, but also what you hope you can leave to your successors to implement and develop. And so I think that, you know, we have to take short-term views on certain matters. I'm committed to execute on the integration. I'm committed to deliver a platform to my successor that can continue to grow and create value for clients and shareholders. So, you know, with the board, we are trying to figure out what is the direction of travel, and the successor has to be chosen based on her or his ability to comply with that strategy. So it's not important.
Sounds a little bit like a maybe, but we will. But that has been you have given a very good analysis of the year ahead, especially for UBS and Credit Suisse. Thank you very much, Sergio.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for coming. Just to say at the end, first of all, will you please thank again Sergio and John? I think downstairs all of us were sitting and talking about what happens to do with children. I'd like to thank once again our sponsor Mubadala for doing it, and I'd like to thank Pangaea for providing you with gilets created from wild flowers, which offer a plant-based alternative to goose and duck that keeps you warm. So you leave this place fully equipped for the year ahead and all forms of climate. This house is open for the next few days, and I hope to see many of you there. Thank you very, very much for being here.